and I am with the communications team of the Feldenkrais Guild of North America. And I'm so excited today because I have Kendi today, and she is a really well-known Feldenkrais practitioner. She's also an assistant trainer and a director of learning at the Feldenkrais Academy, which is founded by Jeff Holler, I believe. And she's just a really well-known teacher of anatomy. I know I've taken her classes and really enjoyed them, and I know many other practitioners who have. So I really am so excited to learn from Kendi more about how can practitioners improve their anatomical competency. And so welcome.
Thank you.
Kendi, the first question, of course, is why, as Feldenkrais practitioners, do we need to learn anatomy? Could we just get by without it?
Of course, we can get by without it. You know, I always say this, and I used to always start all of my anatomy classes this way, which is to say that one can be a fantastic Feldenkrais practitioner and teacher and not know a bit of anatomy. And one can be a completely terrible Feldenkrais practitioner and teacher and know a lot of anatomy. The point is, you could be a really great Feldenkrais practitioner and know your anatomy. And that's kind of what I'm after. So is it important? It depends. You know, we have a lot of practitioners that we graduate that never feel successful and never feel competent. And this is one way that we can fill in some knowledge gaps, fill in their own image of what's possible and probable, and help them be more competent and confident and successful. It's one way. The second way, and this is important to me, is that a lot of people come to us and they have an anatomical bias or lens that they have conversations with us about. I have a tendonitis, I have arthritis, and I have hip pain. It's always something anatomical. And if we can talk to them in their language, then it builds connection and credibility. If we try to drag them away from their language and make them speak our language of awareness and variation and choice, maybe at the beginning, it's not as easy for them to connect to us. And of course, I believe in my work and I want everybody to connect to us. And the language is one way that we can meet people where they are.
That's a really great idea. Yeah. And as probably as a physical therapist, you know, I get a lot of clients who also go to physical therapy or just came from a physical therapist. So it's kind of nice to bridge that completely different paradigm into Feldenkrais.
Yeah, and for me, because I really don't practice as a physical therapist, I really only practice as a Feldenkrais practitioner, but I can't not know everything I know about physical therapy. Also, you know, I'm kind of old. So I'm from the old school of physical therapy when we had more than 7 or 15 minutes to work with a patient. But the really great thing is that I speak both languages and I can help my clients get the most out of their physical therapy. I also am very careful to help my clients appreciate their physical therapy, appreciate the difference between what I'm doing and what their physical therapist can do and wants to do, so that they understand both. And in that way, I really breed respect for both. In that way, the physical therapist can refer me clients because they know that I am supporting them and they support me. That's the way it should be. I'm never going to give somebody some boring exercises that they should do 30 times a day, even when they need them, because what I know how to do is to make those exercises so easy that they will think that they don't need them. And yet we know that exercise works. We know that it's important. It's just not interesting to me.
And for, you know, what is the best way for a Feldenkrais practitioner to become competent anatomically, as opposed to sort of a traditional way of learning where you kind of just learn body parts and bones and all that as groups.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I was always a big devotee of anatomy since I was 13 in 7th grade, and I dissected my first worm. Like, this is super cool to me. Like, I can understand this. This is beautiful and intricate and amazing, and I can be full of wonder and gain more information and all the time. And so I have always been a devotee. That's not the case for everybody. And so as I went through all my years of school and year after year after year of anatomy, it just got more and more interesting and fun for me. It was never boring. It was sometimes a lot of information to learn to, ace your test so you can go on to the next great thing. But I never didn't love it. I never wasn't interested in it. But when I was in graduate school, this was after I'm graduated from physical therapy school. I'm taking an advanced degree in physical therapy. And yes, it's true. Yet another anatomy class. No cadavers to dissect, no cats, no goats, no pigs, no frogs, but yet another anatomy class. And this was basically my class. And really, this thing and one other thing that happened in PT school changed my life. And what we had to do was every week, we had to research and find something about anatomy that was meaningful, important, relevant to our work that we never knew before. And we had to write a paper, 5 pages, about what that thing was and why it was so relevant and important. And that opened up a whole new world for me, right? Because now I'm not just learning what I have to learn to pass the test. I'm following my own curiosity. That was one thing. The other thing that happened to me while I was still in physical therapy school was my final exam in kinesiology. This was the final exam. One question. The teacher is standing at the blackboard. That was back in the day. Like I said, I'm old when we only had blackboards. Teacher standing at the blackboard, writing on the blackboard above her head. Please name all of the muscles, their origins, insertions, actions, and innervations that the teacher is using. One question. So I start writing. My classmates, after, an hour, they're out the door. I'm still writing. It's getting dark. I'm still writing because I realize that there is not one single muscle or bone or origin that is not, or nerve that is not being used by that teacher. That meant I had to include all the eye muscles and her breathing and the feet. I had to include everything. And that, I think, was one of the things that really set me up to be kind of a sponge for Feldenkrais. By the way, when I was in PT school and I was doing my research on how to teach motor tasks, my advisor said, after I'd done all my research, you should look into the Feldenkrais thing because it's a way of teaching movement and you haven't done any research about that. So you should really include this in your research. So I was already kind of a sponge for this idea that even one thing we're doing, writing on the blackboard, includes all of us and that we have to attend to all of us. Anyway, that's a long answer to say that I was always fascinated and delighted with anatomy. On the other hand, I've always attached it to something that was meaningful. And we know to be a good teacher or a good learner, it has to be relevant. We have to establish the relevancy to someone. Luckily, as Feldenkrais practitioners, everything that has to do with anatomy is relevant because the minute we watch somebody move, watch somebody walk, put our hands on them, we are engaging with their anatomy. And what a delicious and wonderful thing to be able to put our hands somewhere and know all the way through in 3 dimensions, the layers upon layers of what we're feeling, what those things do. And it becomes, at least for me, and I think for my students, you can maybe talk about it because you've taken my classes, that I think for my students too, feeling, you can almost begin to feel where the students have a self-image that's inaccurate, that's fuzzy, that's wrong. We can feel it more clearly, more precisely, and therefore help them more easily and more efficiently, I think. What's happened for you now that you've learned a bit of anatomy my way?
Yeah, it's
And
definitely
the traditional way.
Yeah, it's definitely because it's connected to movement right away. You know, we don't wait till later till we study all the muscle groups, and then, you know, it's immediately connected to movement and function. It's much more meaningful, like you said, and it's much easier to learn something that has meaning and connects to a real person or, you know, client that you may be working with next day. It's definitely I think it sinks much quicker. But you know, related to this, I actually do have a question. You know, let's say somebody feels like they have a huge gap, anatomically speaking, and it feels overwhelming, right? It just seems like it's such a big topic. And what would be your advice if somebody were to kind of create a plan? You know, okay, I decided I want to master this big topic, and I want this to be a support for my work as a Feldenkrais practitioner. How would you approach this if you were maybe a newer practitioner or somebody who just, you know, looked in the face of the hard truth and said, okay, I need to start doing something about this? What is kind of a less intimidating way to go about this?
Well, it's a hard question for me because I'm teaching the classes.
Yes.
So then I just teach them based on what I know. You know, I teach a thing called enough anatomy because I know in practice, after all these years, what's pertinent, what's relevant, what's necessary. But if I didn't have my experience, my knowledge, you know, there's a couple of things that are online. Like one of my favorite things is KenHub. And so if it were me and I decided I needed to know something about anatomy, then I would, of course, base it on whatever struggle I had with the client, right? And of course, I've done this with something I didn't know about. If somebody comes in with a term, with a diagnosis that I don't know, what do? First thing I do is start researching it. I do not just like look at Wikipedia. I start looking at a bunch of research papers I want. And I'm going to say this to everybody, get lots and lots of sources, not just one. One source is not enough to make it a fact. Need lots of sources. So that's if I want to know about a pathology. And then, of course, I would want to know about the anatomy. So I love KenHub. KenHub.com, and it's a kind of a subscription. And that way, let's suppose somebody wanted to know about ankle sprains. Well, you know, there's lots of different ligaments in the ankle and they can get sprained. There's one that commonly gets sprained, that always gets sprained. So that's a thing that one could do. One could go to KenHub because it's not sort of an advertisement for somebody's business, really, and they're darling. Their videos are darling, the way that they present the information. I would just look up and watch a video about ankle anatomy. It might be, I don't really know this because I already know so much anatomy. If I watch the video, it seems simple to me, but it might not seem simple to somebody else. So, okay, so I'd watch it again. And sometimes there's little videos that have shorter bits and they have little articles. So that's one thing. I mean, of course, there's always a YouTube. Again, the source is important because it's easy to watch the shortest one or the longest one. But I find sometimes if I'm looking for a YouTube video that can show something that I want my class to understand, clearly, I have to go through a lot of videos to find something that's accurate and just the facts, not somebody's impression. Because I want people to find out for themselves and create their own ideas about what's possible, rather than having somebody else feed them a different belief system that may or may not be anatomically accurate. So there's that, just to be careful about that. There are, I'm trying to think of, are there books? You know, I have lots of anatomy books. And, you know, probably my favorite book is the Theme Anatomy Atlas. But again, there's a lot of complexity in there. So I'm not sure for myself, if I was a beginner, if that complexity would overwhelm me, or if I would be able to identify what's important. So if I were a beginning practitioner, I would start with a problem that's vexing me. Either a problem in myself vexing me, or a problem with the client, and I would start there. What is this thing? Right? What is the anatomy of this thing? Is it a joint? Is it a muscle? Not even what it really is. What does the client say it is? Okay, the client comes in and says, I have all this trap tightness. So I'm gonna find out, what are the traps? Well, it's trapezius, right? And I would say, okay, look up, what is the trapezius? Because there's an upper, a middle, and a lower trapezius. What does it do? And then I'm gonna look at the videos, and then maybe I'm gonna wanna understand, well, how does a muscle work? And maybe I'm gonna look up muscle videos. You know, I have my little apps that I use. I love the visible body apps. I use, and anybody who wants to know anatomy, I think they're super great if you just want to pay for the app. I use Visible Body Atlas, Visible Body Muscle, Visible Body Physiology and Pathology. I use another set of apps called Muscle Pro 3, which I love, and Brain and Nervous System Pro 3. And I have a couple of apps that are sort of developmental apps. I can't remember the names of them right now. So that's another great thing. There are some apps which I will not name, which I don't fancy at all. But these are the ones I really fancy. And I've shopped for a lot of them. I can say that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And another thing that I really found helpful for myself from your class is that you would give us a home ATM to do, which would highlight the functioning of certain parts of anatomy that we just studied. And I would actually teach that class at times to my students. And that would be really good learning, because in order to teach it, you know, I had to really figure it out for myself and feel it in myself. And this embodied kind of way of, you know, knowing my own anatomy was really, really helpful. So,
and a shout out to the IFF too,
Mm-hmm.
because let me just shout out to them, because, you know, I've made an Alexandrian eye collection for each of my 6 modules, and it has on the lesson which muscles are I use as a reference, why that lesson is a reference. And, you know, the IFF has all of those collections on their website now, which many thanks to them for putting them up there. And of course, we love the IFF. So
yeah, so that's a great resource for somebody who wants to even do their self-study and just, you know, get a collection on specific theme.
And other people have collections on there too about breathing and about walking, but my collections are specifically about anatomy. Well, one is called Walk This Way, which is really about the pelvis and the hips. But, you know, there's one for the shoulder and one for the head and neck and one for the core and one for the legs and the feet. Maybe I forgot one, I'm not sure. There's 6.
Yeah, and I think, or I guess that's a feeling I get sometimes. People are worried about anatomy because it may lead to this kind of reductionist view of things, where you start thinking in parts and not the whole body. So what's your remedy for this?
I don't, honestly, I have no idea how anyone who ever studied anatomy could possibly think that. It is hard enough for me to divide one topic into 8 or 10 weeks because everything is connected to everything else, and it's nearly impossible for me to end the class on time because it's always looping back to something. So I honestly don't know where that sentiment comes from. That's never been possible for me to even consider. So I understand that a lot of people believe that, and it's just a thing that I don't get. Call me culturally disabled. I just don't. I mean, how can you think that? You think about the muscles of facial expression and how can you even use just one of them? Or you think about flexing your elbow, and can you even think that you could only use the bicep? You can't do that without stabilizing everything else. So for me, the study of anatomy builds this appreciation of the complexity of the wholeness. It is not understanding the anatomy that allows us to limit ourselves to one movement, one action, one body part. So
thank you. And any final words? It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Any final words of wisdom for the practitioners who are interested in learning anatomy?
Let's see. I would say approach it like it's fun. Don't try to cram everything in there. If you don't know all the Latin names of something, it doesn't matter. But how things are shaped, structure does enable function or make function impossible. So however it is that you think about movement, then this is just another additional rich depth to it, but make it fun because it is fun. And besides that, you're walking around using that anatomy all day long. You might as well know what you're using if you're lugging it around with you anyway. That's what I say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia.
Thank you so much for finding the time to speak to me. Thank you.
My pleasure.